In the heart of Tennessee, in 1853, a quiet rebellion unfolded in the big house where the Masters family lived. Louisa, a young enslaved woman, had long endured the horrors of bondage. But in an act of defiance that would be remembered for generations, she sowed poison into the clothes of her oppressors. This is the untold story of one woman's courage, her quiet resistance, and the dark legacy she left behind. It's a humid summer afternoon in Tennessee, 1853. The sound of the whip cracks across the air as Louisa, a seamstress enslaved by the wealthy Williams family, sews a delicate stitch in the collar of a crisp white shirt. The room is silent, save for the rhythmic motion of her needle and the rustling of fabric. But there is something more in the air today, an undercurrent of tension, of defiance. For years, Louisa had lived under the oppressive thumb of her masters. She had witnessed cruelty, humiliation, and the death of her loved ones. But today, Louisa's hands move with purpose. The poison, carefully mixed, is hidden within the stitches. With every pull of the thread, she sews more than fabric. She sews the possibility of justice. The Williams family had tormented her for too long. Today, she would give them a taste of the suffering they had inflicted on countless others. What drove Louisa to this moment of rebellion? What price would she pay for her defiance? And what happened when the poison was finally unleashed? This is the chilling story of Louisa, the enslaved woman who chose to fight back in a way that few could ever imagine. Slavery in the United States was a brutal system that dehumanized millions of African men, women, and children. From the southern plantations to the grand houses of wealthy families, enslaved people lived lives of unimaginable suffering. Among them were women like Louisa, who, though often relegated to domestic roles like cooking, cleaning, and sewing, carried the weight of both their labor and their unvoiced dreams of freedom. Louisa's story begins in the sprawling fields and immaculate rooms of the Williams plantation in Tennessee. The Williams family were known for their wealth, their influence, and their cruelty. They relied on enslaved labor to maintain their property and wealth, never considering the humanity of the people they controlled. Louisa, in particular, became a close confidant to the family matriarch, Mrs. Williams, who trusted her with tasks that were usually reserved for free women. But Louisa's trust was not given freely. She had long seen the horrors of slavery from within the walls of the big house. She had witnessed the abuses suffered by those around her, from the brutal lashings to the emotional scars left on the women forced to serve their masters. It was in these dark moments that Louisa's thoughts began to turn toward rebellion, an act that would not just break the physical chains of oppression, but shatter the illusion of power held by the Williams family. This story, however, is not just one of Louisa's resistance. It is a testament to the untold acts of rebellion that happened in the shadows of history. The poisoning of the Williams family was just one of many quiet acts of defiance that arose from the depths of pain, suffering, and desperation. Louisa's act was a small yet powerful declaration of autonomy, an attempt to balance the scales, even if it meant paying the ultimate price. Louisa was born into slavery on a small plantation in Tennessee. Her mother had been a slave on the Williams estate, and Louisa grew up with the knowledge that her life would be bound to the whims of the white family who owned her. From a young age, Louisa showed a remarkable aptitude for sewing, a skill that would later make her indispensable to the Williams family. She was assigned to work inside the big house where she cleaned, cooked, and sewed for the family. The work was grueling, but it was the cruel indifference of her masters that weighed heavily on her soul. Over the years, Louisa had seen the horrors of slavery firsthand. She had watched as women were torn from their families and sold off to other plantations. She had seen her fellow slaves whipped, beaten, and humiliated for the smallest infractions. And she had felt the deep, gnawing ache of powerlessness. The Williams family, for all their wealth, treated their enslaved workers as little more than property. Louisa's days were spent stitching clothes, repairing linens, and tending to the whims of Mrs. Williams. But there was little comfort in her role. The family's arrogance was insufferable. They believed their wealth gave them the right to treat others as less than human. They never saw Louisa as a person, but as a tool, a machine to be used, worn down, and discarded when no longer useful. But despite this, Louisa's mind never stopped working. She often looked out the window of the big house, watching the world. Beyond the plantation gates, dreaming of freedom. She thought of her mother, who had died after being sold away, and the others who had never had a chance to live a life outside of servitude. The cruelty of the system began to build a fire in her, a fire that would eventually become her act of defiance. The Williams family's cruelty toward their slaves had become notorious. Rumors of mistreatment had spread through the community, yet nothing changed. Mrs. Williams, in particular, was known for her harshness. She would often punish the slaves for the smallest mistakes, her temper unchecked, her authority absolute. It was during one of these moments of cruelty that Louisa's resolve hardened. A new overseer had been hired, a man known for his vicious temper and hatred toward the enslaved. His name was Mr. Turner, and his cruelty exceeded even Mrs. Williams's. He would often whip the men for working too slowly, or punish women for even the slightest misstep. His presence in the big house became a constant reminder of the dangers Louisa faced. Danger not just for herself, but for the entire community of enslaved people. One day, after an especially brutal incident where a fellow slave, Eliza, was whipped for spilling milk, Louisa found herself alone with Mrs. Williams in the sewing room. Mrs. Williams, oblivious to the suffering she had just witnessed, asked Louisa to mend a set of fine shirts for her husband. As Louisa took the fabric, in her hands she felt the weight of the moment. It was then that the idea took shape, an idea that would forever change the course of her life. Louisa had long known how to mix herbs and chemicals from the garden to create various concoctions. She had watched as others used these natural remedies to heal, but she also knew that these substances could be deadly in the right doses. The idea of poisoning her masters didn't come to her lightly. It was a desperate measure, a way to strike back against the pain they had inflicted upon her people for so long. Louisa began to secretly sow small amounts of poison into the clothes of the Williams family. The poison, a mixture of crushed herbs, was carefully hidden within the seams of the shirts and dresses she was mending. It was a slow-acting poison, one that wouldn't be immediately detected but would cause illness over time. The idea was simple: let the masters experience the fear and suffering they had caused so many others. As the shirts were finished, Louisa couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. For the first time in her life, she was in control. She had taken power away from her oppressors, and she would not be punished for it, not yet anyway. But the tension in her chest remained. What would happen when they began to fall ill? Would they suspect her? Would they finally see her as something more than a slave? Days passed, and the family began to show signs of sickness. At first, it was mild, stomach pains, headaches, and weakness, but soon the symptoms worsened. Mrs. Williams, who had always prided herself on her health, found herself bedridden, unable to function. Her husband, too, fell ill. Their condition baffled the family doctor, who could find no apparent cause. The overseer, Mr. Turner, grew suspicious, but he couldn't pinpoint the source of the illness. Louisa's heart raced as she watched the family members suffer, knowing that her quiet rebellion was taking its toll. As the illness spread, Louisa's actions were discovered. The family began to question their servants, and Louisa was accused of poisoning them. Despite her innocence in the eyes of the law, the very act of rebellion against her masters made her guilty in their eyes. Louisa was brutally punished, whipped, beaten, and imprisoned. The Williams family recovered, but the damage had been done. The fear they felt from the illness lingered, and their sense of control was shattered. Louisa's act of defiance had left a lasting mark on their psyche, a reminder of the power that could exist within the enslaved population. Louisa's fate was grim. She was sold to another plantation far from Tennessee, where her name was forgotten and her story buried. But the memory of her quiet rebellion lived on, passed down through generations of enslaved people who saw in Louisa a symbol of resistance, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was a spark of defiance that could not be extinguished. Louisa's story is one of quiet resistance, a reminder of the untold acts of rebellion that occurred in the shadows of history. Her act of poisoning the Williams family was not just about vengeance, it was about reclaiming agency in a world that denied. Her humanity, her bravery, her strength, and her quiet defiance remind us that the fight for freedom was not only fought on the battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of those who lived in bondage. While Louisa's life may have ended in suffering, her story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It's a reminder that even in the darkest moments of history, there were those who refused to submit, who found ways to fight back against oppression, even if only in the smallest of ways. We reflect on her story today. We must remember that the struggle for justice and equality is ongoing. Louisa's act of resistance, though centuries old, resonates in the movements for civil rights, equality, and freedom that continue to this day. Her legacy lives on in the fight for dignity and humanity for all people. If Louisa's story has moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. By learning about the untold acts of resistance like hers, we can keep the memory of those who fought for freedom alive. If you want to hear more about the hidden histories that shape the world we live in, check out our related videos, where we continue to uncover the brave, often forgotten stories of those who fought against oppression. Subscribe to Forgotten Chains and join us in remembering the heroes who resisted in ways that history tried to erase. Let's continue to honor their courage by ensuring their stories are never forgotten. Freedom, after all, is a legacy we must all strive to protect.